They said Elsie Ray was cursed, though no one dared say it to her face. Out in the dry stretches of Wyoming territory, people didn't waste words, but they sure spent enough of them behind closed doors. She knew what they whispered. The way her belly swelled every other spring, the way her man's eyes darkened when it happened again. Daughters, only daughters. 3 of them, and the 4th still inside her when the preacher stopped coming by. Elsie's flaw wasn't that she had girls. It was that she didn't lie. Never had. Even when it would have been easier. Even when it would have saved her bruises or made the neighbors smile and nod like she belonged. She was raised by a mother who told her, truth don't always save you, but it keeps you clean inside. And Elsie believed that, even when it cost her. The little town of Jackson's Ridge looked like something carved out of wind and dirt. Nothing softened it. Not even the church bell that hadn't rung since Pastor Elwood caught Elsie in the market, clutching her newborn baby girl and bleeding through her dress. Again, he said, then turned and walked off like he didn't see her at all. Clayton Dole was her husband in name, not in love. He married her when she was 16 and pretty, with black curls and hands quick to patch a man's shirt or hold his hunger at bay. But after the first baby, a girl named Dinah with eyes too sharp for her years, his patience thinned. By the second, he'd stopped naming them. The third he wouldn't even look at. Boys carry names. Girls just carry shame. He muttered one night, drunk on rot-gut whiskey and sorrow he never spoke out loud. The truth was, Clayton wanted a legacy. Land, sons, a name that would stretch beyond his own coffin. But the world had no mind to give him that. And Elsie, bless her or curse her, kept birthing reminders that he was no more in control than the cattle dying of thirst behind their fence. By the time the 4th daughter came along, Elsie had stopped crying. She wrapped the baby in an old flour sack, kissed her on the forehead, and waited for Clayton to come home. He stood in the doorway, eyes bloodshot, and didn't ask if it had gone well. Just said, "You've done it again," then turned and walked out into the dark. That night, he didn't come home. When he finally did, he brought men with him. Sheriff Wallace, 2 church deacons, and a wagon Elsie had only seen used for hauling drunks and lunatics. They didn't speak much, just looked at her like something broken. Clayton stood behind them, his face a blank wall. "You've been touched in the head, Elsie," Sheriff Wallace said. "It's not right, how you keep birthing girls like some hexed animal. You scream at night. Folks say you talk to ghosts. It ain't safe for the young uns." Elsie stood there, holding her baby girl, not even 2 days old. "I don't talk to ghosts," she whispered. "I talk to God. He's the only one listens." But they didn't care. They took the baby from her arms, handed her to a woman from the church, Sister Evelyn, who smelled like old wood and mint tea, and pulled Elsie by the wrist like she'd stolen something. She didn't scream, didn't fight. She just looked at Clayton and said, "You're killing something in yourself you'll never get back." They locked her up in a place up north, a stone-walled building meant to cure the hysterical and unfit. Most of the women there were like her, poor, quiet, and inconvenient. Some whispered to the walls. Some clawed at their own skin. Elsie did neither. She sat still, thought about her girls, and waited for someone to notice the wrongness of it all. But no one came. Back in Jackson's Ridge, the townsfolk went on like nothing had happened. The girls were divided among different homes, fostered out like livestock. Elsie's youngest, baby Marin, was taken in by Sister Evelyn, though not out of kindness. Evelyn was known to use babies like sewing pins, something to keep her hands busy between scripture and scolding. 3 months passed, maybe 4. Elsie stopped keeping count. The air in that place was thick with vinegar and silence. But one night, during a thunderstorm that seemed to shake the bones of the building, Elsie woke to a sound that didn't belong. Not wind, not weeping, a baby's cry. She sat up, heart pounding. No one in the building had babies. That was the whole point. But the cry came again, thin and hungry. Elsie followed it, barefoot on cold tile, past locked doors and sleeping women. It led her to the far end of the hallway, where a narrow window stood cracked open, rain blowing in. Outside, In the dark, a figure on horseback sat near the wall. The baby's cry rose again, louder now. Elsie pressed her face to the bars. The man looked up. He wore a wide-brimmed hat soaked through with rain, his face half covered in shadow. He was holding something close to his chest, wrapped tight in a blanket. He looked up at Elsie and said nothing, but his eyes held her there, like he'd been looking for her all along. The next day, she told the nurse. Told her she'd heard a baby cry, seen a man on horseback. The nurse called in the doctor. The doctor said it was part of her delusions, prescribed laudanum, told her to rest. But Elsie didn't rest. She didn't take the medicine. She knew what she heard. More than that, she knew her baby was still out there, crying, waiting. What she didn't know was how deep Clayton's betrayal ran. He told the town Elsie had gone mad, said she threw the baby out in a fevered fit, that she tried to drown the child in the river. Evelyn backed the story. The deacons nodded, and the townspeople believed it, because it was easier than facing the truth. Easier than asking why a man would throw away the mother of his children just because he wanted a different kind of legacy. But that stranger on horseback, he didn't believe the lies. He'd been riding south through the territory, looking for work, when he stopped in Jackson's Ridge to water his horse. He'd heard the baby cry behind Evelyn's house. Heard it again the next night. He knocked. She'd sent him away. So he watched, waited. Then, one stormy night, he saw her leave the child outside, screaming in a basket, while she sang inside the parlor like it didn't matter at all. He took the baby, rode north, asked every road walker and traveler about a woman named Elsie with 3 girls and a husband who never smiled. And now he knew where she was. He just didn't know yet how much danger he was riding into. The man on horseback was called Rufus Clay. Most folks who'd heard the name remembered him for quiet deeds done fast. Small-town wrongs righted in silence. Like the time he tracked a child stolen from a wagon camp or stopped a preacher from running off with another man's wife. He didn't talk about where he came from or why he never stayed long, only that he went where he was needed. But even Rufus had a past heavy enough to keep him restless, and it sat just beneath his ribs like a dull ache that flared when the nights got cold. Rufus had seen what happens when people believe lies more than they trust their own eyes. So when he'd found the baby girl crying in a basket outside that whitewashed house with lace curtains, he didn't ask permission. He took her, rode all night, asking only what needed asking. And now, the trail had led him to that strange building on the edge of Cheyenne County, a place full of women who'd been discarded like waste and labeled unfit because someone stronger wanted them silent. The girl, Marin, he'd learned from a scrap of cloth sewn into her blanket, had stopped crying as soon as he lifted her. Something about her stillness gnawed at him. She was too young to understand she'd been abandoned, but her silence felt old, like she already knew not to expect much from the world. Rufus didn't plan on staying long. He wasn't built for lingering. But when he looked up and saw Elsie's face through the bars, pale, worn, but still stubborn as the moon, something shifted. She didn't scream or beg, just watched him like she knew who he was, even though she couldn't have. He'd have to find a way in. Elsie, meanwhile, was beginning to see that not everyone around her was who they pretended to be. There was a woman named Mercy Trask who worked the night shift in the ward, a wiry, sharp-eyed nurse who spoke little but lingered when Elsie passed. Mercy had once been locked behind the same doors, before she'd managed to convince the staff she was better. But everyone in the ward knew she kept a stash of letters hidden under the floorboards in the medicine room. Notes from women long gone, whose stories had been buried under lies. Mercy watched Elsie the way a coyote watches a wounded rabbit, not with cruelty, but with quiet knowing. One night, she slipped Elsie a piece of bread with a folded scrap of paper tucked inside. "Heard you got a visitor," Mercy said in her dry, cracked voice. "Be careful. Ain't no one around here without a secret." The note was short. "Keep the window unlatched." Elsie read it twice. She knew it came from a man on horseback. She felt it, and something in her chest began to warm just a little. But not everyone wanted Elsie to hope. Sister Evelyn, back in Jackson's Ridge, had grown bolder since Elsie's removal. With Elsie out of the picture, she'd taken on the role of moral guardian, hosting prayer circles, arranging adoptions, positioning herself as the savior of misplaced children. She kept Marin wrapped in fine linens for show, but never held her with warmth. What Evelyn wanted wasn't family. It was control, influence, power in a town that only half respected women unless they knew how to play God's favorite. What she hadn't expected was for Marin to disappear. When the baby vanished, Evelyn spread word that thieves had taken her, that she'd been attacked. But the lie didn't sit right on her. It twisted her sleep and made her hands shake. She knew someone was watching her house, though she hadn't caught sight of them. And worse, Clayton Dole had started asking questions she didn't like. Clayton had secrets of his own. He'd told himself that sending Elsie away was the only choice left to a man. But the truth was darker. He'd been with another woman, a widow named Tansy Bell who owned a parcel of dry land near the canyon. Tansy had promised him a son, said she'd seen it in a dream. And Clayton, desperate to rewrite his name into something lasting, had believed her. But Tansy wasn't who she seemed either. She was quiet, lovely in a way that caught light and bent it. But behind her soft words was something hard and waiting. Tansy knew Elsie, knew the girls, and she knew that lies don't stay buried just because a man wants them to. She'd warned Clayton not to cross certain lines. He hadn't listened. Back in Cheyenne County, Rufus had made a friend of sorts, a Metis stable hand named Elias who worked near the asylum. Elias had grown up drifting between the Lakota camps and rail towns, picking up languages and grudges in equal measure. He didn't trust white men, but he trusted the way Rufus didn't flinch when things got ugly. "You want to get a woman out of that place?" Elias asked one night over a shared flask. "Gonna take more than a window latch. Gonna take dirt on the people keeping her in." Rufus nodded. "Then I need names, and I need them fast." Elias grinned without warmth. "Start with the doctor. Wallace Beck. Says he's curing hysteria. Mostly he just likes breaking what he thinks don't belong." Rufus already knew Beck's type, men who use science to do what cruelty used to. But what he didn't know was that Beck and Sheriff Wallace from Jackson's Ridge had been sending women like Elsie away for years. It was a quiet trade. Families embarrassed by daughters who fought back, husbands ashamed of wives who stopped obeying. They get sent away with fake diagnoses. Some came back blank-eyed. Some didn't come back at all. Rufus started digging, whispered questions to Elias, paid off a records clerk who kept whiskey under her desk. Within a week, he had names, letters, proof that Elsie's lockup had never been about madness. It had been about control. Her crime wasn't hysteria. It was defiance. He brought the papers to Mercy. She read them with shaking hands. "I've seen worse," she said, "but this might be enough. Enough to break Elsie out? Maybe. Enough to expose the system? Unlikely. People in power didn't fall easy." Meanwhile, Elsie's nights were changing. Mercy began slipping her books, matches, soft things, signs that escape was coming. Elsie didn't ask how. She just watched, waited, and prayed not in words, but in breath and silence. Then came the letter. It was folded in a piece of linen and smuggled in with her laundry. The handwriting was rough, but careful. "Your baby is safe. Her name is Marin. She knows your voice." Elsie held the paper to her chest and cried for the first time in months. But not far behind her hope came another twist. Tansy Bell had found out where Marin was. She followed Rufus's trail, quiet as a fox, curious as sin. She hadn't come to take the child. She came to see what kind of man could ride into a storm for a woman he didn't even know. And when she saw Rufus holding the baby by the fire and whispering her name like it was something holy, Tansy understood something Elsie didn't yet know. That not all saviors come without strings, and some debts are paid in heartbreak. The wind howled across the plains that night, but it wasn't the cold that made Elsie's hands tremble. It was the silence inside the asylum, the kind that feels too thick like someone's holding their breath just around the corner. Mercy had said tonight was the night. The papers Rufus found, ledgers, letters, names signed in careful ink, had been copied and slipped to the local paper editor through Elias. The plan was simple: expose the asylum's lies and create enough noise that Elsie couldn't just disappear. But simple didn't mean safe. Mercy had disappeared 2 nights earlier. No one spoke of it. The staff said she transferred. But Elsie knew better. When people left that suddenly, they didn't transfer. They were buried under silence, their stories wiped clean. She clutched the folded note Rufus sent her last. A single sentence burned into her mind. "I'll be outside by dawn. Don't look back." That was before everything went sideways. Tansy Bell arrived in Cheyenne County not in a wagon or stagecoach, but riding alone, her pale yellow dress covered by a wool cloak, her dark hair pinned like a widow's. She didn't ask for Elsie. She didn't ask about the baby. She asked for Rufus Clay. Said she had information about his past. Said it quietly, to the wrong man in the right saloon. And within hours, the story spread like a spark in dry grass. Rufus had been a soldier once. He never talked about it. Not because he was ashamed, but because war didn't leave room for simple answers. After the war, he joined a marshal's posse chasing fugitives through the territories. During one raid, a fire had broken out. 3 men were killed. Wrong men, as it turned out. Innocent ones. The commanding marshal lied about what happened. Rufus didn't. He testified. The marshal was disgraced. But the dead stayed dead. And some men didn't forget. One of those men was in town now. A bounty hunter named Clive Jarrett, with a face like a dried-out riverbed and a scar cutting across his neck like someone once tried to silence him the hard way. Clive wasn't after Elsie. He was after Rufus. Said Rufus owed a life. Said justice didn't fade with time. Rufus saw Clive before Clive saw him. He moved Marin to a new safe house with Elias's help, an abandoned sheep barn tucked into a low ridge outside town. He wrapped the baby in a thick shawl and laid her in a wooden crate lined with wool. She was sleeping, her tiny hands curled like leaves. Rufus stared at her for a long time. "You ain't mine," he whispered, "but I'd die before I let them take you." Then he saddled his horse and rode straight into town. He didn't go looking for Clive. He went looking for Tansy. He found her in the saloon's back room, sipping coffee like it was wine, her eyes soft but sharp underneath. She didn't look surprised to see him. "You brought fire to this place," she said. "You always do." Rufus leaned against the door. "What do you want, Tansy?" "I want a name," she said. "The name of the man who sent Elsie away." Rufus blinked. "Clayton Dole." Tansy smiled, slow and bitter. "Good. That's what I thought. He lied to me. Said she was mad. Said the baby died. That man wouldn't know the truth if it bit him," Rufus muttered. Tansy stood. "I loved him once. I thought we were going to build something honest. But you know what the truth is, Rufus? We're all just stepping stones to some man's future. And the second we don't serve it, they bury us." Rufus didn't argue. He couldn't. Tansy handed him a folded page. "These are medical records. I stole them from Clayton's desk. He's not just cruel. He's careful. Had her committed before the 4th child was even born. Filed the papers weeks before." Rufus scanned the page. It was signed by Dr. Wallace Beck. Backdated. Official. Elsie had never stood a chance. Back at the asylum, Elsie waited by the open window. She had a satchel Mercy once gave her, filled with scraps, a bread crust, a spare cloth, a threadbare ribbon that once belonged to her second daughter, Sarah. She didn't know where her other girls were. Only Marin. Only the baby. That was the one thing that made sense in a world that had gone rotten with lies. As dawn broke, she climbed onto the narrow windowsill. Her legs trembled. The ground looked farther away than it really was. Then she heard it, a faint whistle. Rufus. She let herself fall. Rufus caught her halfway, pulling her onto the back of the horse before the guard dogs even barked. They rode like fire across the plain, the cold stinging her face, her arms locked around his waist. She didn't speak. Not yet. But the wind in her hair felt like the first breath after drowning. They made it to the barn just after sunup. Marin was awake, fussing. Elsie nearly collapsed when she held her, the baby curling against her chest like she knew her mother's smell even after all that time. Rufus stood back and let her cry. He didn't touch her, just watched with eyes that looked older than they had the day before. "We ain't done," he said quietly. "They'll come." Elsie nodded. "Let them." But the next blow didn't come from the sheriff. It came from inside. Clive had tracked them. Elias had seen him near the edge of the ridge, but hadn't made it back in time. Clive entered the barn just after nightfall, gun drawn, face cold. "Should have stayed gone, Clay," he said. Rufus didn't reach for his weapon. "You came to settle something, then settle it." But Clive didn't shoot. Instead, he looked at Elsie. "You're the woman who started this mess." "I'm the woman they locked up for having daughters," she said, not blinking. Clive lowered his gun. "Then maybe I'm in the wrong place." He turned to leave, but before he could, a rifle shot cracked the air. The barn wall splintered. Tansy screamed. Elsie dropped to the ground, shielding Marin with her body. Rufus pushed Clive behind a haystack. Another shot. Closer. Sheriff Wallace had found them. He wasn't alone. Clayton was with him, and 3 other men from Jackson's Ridge. Quiet men who stood tall in Sunday church and dirty in their souls the rest of the week. Rufus fired back. Clive joined him. For 5 long minutes, the barn turned to smoke and fear. Then silence. When it cleared, 2 of the men were down. Wallace was wounded in the leg. Clayton was gone, fled into the trees. Rufus kicked the rifle away from Wallace's hand. "It's over." Wallace spat blood. "You think anyone's going to believe you?" Elsie stepped forward, her voice calm and deadly. "I don't need them to believe me. I've got the papers. I've got the girl. And I've got your name in every corner of that ledger." Tansy held up the stolen records. "This goes to the judge tomorrow." Wallace didn't respond. He just groaned, his face pale, hand clutching his bleeding thigh. But even as Elsie felt the rush of survival, a deeper pain opened. Clayton had escaped. And the other girls, Dinah, Sarah, and Elsie's middle child, Grace, were still scattered, still hidden. No court order could find them fast enough. No printed truth could undo what years of lies had buried. But Elsie had a plan. She turned to Rufus. "You said you don't stay long." He nodded. "I want you to find them. My girls. Bring them back to me." Rufus didn't answer right away. He looked at Marin, then Elsie, then back toward the night sky, where stars were breaking through. "I'll find them," he said finally. "But only if you promise one thing." "What?" "That you don't give up, even if it takes years." Elsie smiled, tears in her eyes. "I already waited years. I can wait longer." Behind them, the barn quieted. Tansy sat beside Clive, both of them watching the firelight flicker. And far off, in the trees, someone was still running. But they weren't running forever. The world had turned upside down. Betrayals revealed. Truth sharpened. But for the first time, the story was in Elsie's hands. And this time, she wouldn't let it go. By the time the first frost hit the ridge, the barn was gone, burned to the ground by someone who didn't want Elsie's truth to take root. The fire started in the dead of night. Rufus had moved Elsie and Marin out only 2 hours earlier, something in him uneasy ever since Clayton disappeared into the woods. The blaze lit up the sky, orange against the dark, and by morning, nothing was left but ash and bone-chilled fear. Sheriff Wallace had been taken into custody, but he wasn't talking. The town judge, old Godfrey Lang, was no fool. He knew Wallace hadn't worked alone, but when he asked for names, Wallace smirked and said, "You already drink with them." That answer hung over the courthouse like smoke. Tansy disappeared next. Left a note, folded into Rufus's old war satchel. "I got what I came for. If I stay, I die too. Keep her safe." No signature, just a pressed yellow flower tucked inside. Rufus didn't blame her. Tansy had been used by Clayton once, then almost used again by the truth. She was brave, but not suicidal. Elsie was losing sleep, not because of Marin, who'd started sleeping in longer stretches, but because something inside her had cracked. Not broken, no, broken things stayed still. This was different. This was raw, shifting pain. She knew the other girls were alive. Somewhere. She knew they were kept hidden because someone like Clayton didn't risk letting go of power. But no one would say where. And no one seemed to be looking. That was when Elias came to her, eyes wide, lip bleeding, coat torn. They took Clive, he whispered. Last night. Ambushed him outside the tavern. Said he was stirring things up. The mayor signed it off. Said he was trespassing on county soil without writ. Elsie froze. Where is he now? Elias hesitated. They're holding him in a freight warehouse on Main. No charges. Just keeping him quiet. Rufus's jaw tightened. He's bait. Elsie nodded. For you. Rufus didn't flinch. Then we go in loud. But Elsie surprised him. No, we go in smart. That night, she dressed in Mercy's old uniform. White apron, gray skirt, the cap tight over her braid. She walked straight through the back of the warehouse, where the guards knew to look for nurses on late supply runs. She carried a satchel filled with herbs and powders and a sleeping tincture wrapped in cheesecloth. Inside, she found Clive chained to a steel pipe, eyes swollen, lips split. Thought I was done seeing angels, he rasped when he saw her. She knelt, opened the satchel, and handed him a warm cloth. You're not dying today. I might wish I was by the time they're done. No, she whispered, because I need you alive. You're going to testify. He laughed, bitter and low. You think they'll let that happen? No, she said, but I'm not asking. Outside, Elias had rigged the water cart to backfire when the handle was pulled twice. The guard came running when it exploded. Rufus and Elias went in through the side, dragging Clive out in a burlap sack, pretending he was a barrel of salted pork. By dawn, Clive was gone, headed east on the 3:30 freight train. Elias went with him. Elsie watched the train disappear into the hills, her hands clenched tight in her skirts. 2 witnesses gone. 1 dead woman. Mercy, no longer able to speak. Tansy in the wind. It was all unraveling, and the threads were pulling faster now. Worse still was Naomi. Elsie found her in town 2 days later, sitting on the chapel steps with a rifle in her lap. I thought you left, Elsie said. Naomi didn't look up. I did. Then I came back. Why? Naomi turned slowly. Because you forgot something. She handed Elsie a folded piece of newsprint. On it was a small ink sketch of a girl with wide eyes and a birthmark above her lip. The caption read, Missing, Grace, age 7. Taken from Cheyenne County home. Last seen with a tall man in a tan coat. I didn't print this, Elsie whispered. I never even filed a notice. You didn't have to, Naomi said. Someone else did. That night, Elsie confronted Rufus. Did you write to the paper? She asked. He didn't lie. Yes. Without telling me, I knew you'd try to stop it. She stared at him. Because it puts a target on her back. If they know we're looking, they'll hide her deeper. He didn't blink. They already know we're looking. The only way to pull them out is to make them sweat. Elsie felt it then, the crack deepening, widening between them. She had trusted him more than anyone since Mercy. But now, she wasn't sure. You don't get to play God with my daughters, she said. Rufus's jaw twitched. And you don't get to play safe when they're suffering. The room went silent. Marin cried in the corner. Elsie went to her, lifted her gently. Her hands were shaking. Naomi left that night, too. She didn't say why. But Elsie knew. The danger was climbing too high. Moral lines were getting blurry. And Naomi had already lost one sister in the asylum. She wasn't going to lose herself, too. The next betrayal came from the judge. They called Elsie to testify. Said the asylum was under formal review. Said the county board was listening. Elsie stood in the courthouse, holding Marin in her arms, telling the story from the start. The 4th pregnancy, the letter from Clayton, the sudden commitment, the doctors who never asked her a single question before tying her to a bed. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She told the truth. The room was quiet when she finished. Then Judge Lang leaned forward. Mrs. Dole, do you have proof of the children's births? Elsie blinked. The records were taken, so no birth certificates? No, just Mercy's word. Rufus's. Tansy's. Lang nodded. Then I'm afraid your claim can't proceed until we locate documentation. We need proof of life. But she's right here, Elsie said, holding Marin out. She's proof. Lang's face didn't change. That child's presence doesn't verify the others. Elsie took a step back. You mean you won't help? I mean, Lang said slowly, without paper, you have no case. That night, Elsie walked out of town with Marin wrapped tight and something dark growing in her chest. Not rage, not even grief, just a quiet, hollow understanding. No one was coming to save them. If they wanted justice, they would have to take it. She found Rufus by the river, throwing rocks into the current. I want to kill him, she said. He didn't ask who. She sat beside him. I want to shoot him in the stomach and watch him beg. Rufus's voice was low. I'll help you hide the body. She looked over, startled. He shrugged. Moral lines only hold if the law works. If it doesn't, then it's just survival. She leaned into his shoulder. We're past the law, aren't we? Rufus nodded. And that was when she decided. They weren't just going to find her daughters. They were going to bring Clayton Dole down with them. Not in court. Not with petitions. With the truth, screamed loud from rooftops and nailed to doors. With a trail of evidence gathered in secret, distributed in every township across the territory. With witness after witness, servants, doctors, nurses, all tracked down, interviewed, and given safety. They would do it the old way, one soul at a time. But it meant becoming something darker. It meant blackmail. It meant ambushing mail carriers. It meant bribing stable hands and threatening county clerks. It meant trading dignity for leverage. Rufus crossed the line first, broke into the home of Dr. Beck, and stole a stack of falsified medical reports. Found a letter from Clayton's lawyer proving he paid to silence Mercy's report. Rufus brought it to Elsie, hands stained with ink and shame. I told you I'd find them, he said, but I didn't tell you what it had cost. Elsie took the papers. You don't have to carry the weight alone. Yes, he said. I do. Their relationship cracked again, not from hate, but from the weight of too many secrets. They slept on opposite sides of the safe house now, shared meals in silence. Every word felt like walking barefoot over glass. But still, they didn't stop. By the time winter arrived, they had names, addresses, a map of everyone who'd helped Clayton build his empire on the backs of ruined women. And Elsie? She wasn't afraid of crossing lines anymore. Because when the law makes you a ghost, sometimes the only way to live is to become something else. Something unstoppable. The snow hadn't melted yet when Elsie finally found where they were keeping the girls. It was in a farmhouse tucked beyond Mill Creek, boarded up and disguised as a seasonal lodge. No signs, no lanterns, just a smoke trail from the chimney that didn't match the cold silence of a house, supposedly empty for the winter. Naomi had tracked it from a supply run, noticed canned peaches and wool blankets being loaded into a wagon marked for the lodge, even though no travelers had been through in months. Elsie didn't hesitate. She went that night, wrapped Marin tight against her chest, and left her with Rufus in the backwoods cabin. He tried to stop her. You don't even know what's inside that house, he said. I know my daughters are. What if it's a trap? Elsie looked at him, tired and calm. Then I'll walk into it. She went alone. The farmhouse door was unlocked. Inside, the air was too still, too clean. Dust hadn't touched the floorboards. The hallway was lit by a single oil lamp, the kind Clayton favored for late-night meetings, dim enough to hide emotion, bright enough to show obedience. In the room at the end of the hall, Elsie found Grace. She was taller than Elsie remembered. 7 now, eyes darker, warier. She sat on a cot, holding the hand of a smaller girl, a toddler with the same birthmark above her lip. Elsie's knees gave out when she saw it. They didn't recognize her at first. Grace, Elsie whispered. The girl looked up, then clutched the younger girl closer. I'm your mother. Grace flinched. No, my mama's dead. I'm not, Elsie said, kneeling. They told you that, but they lied. Grace's eyes filled. Her mouth trembled. But before she could speak, boots sounded behind Elsie. Clayton stepped into the room. He hadn't aged. Not really. still wore the same sheriff's badge, though it wasn't real anymore. He didn't reach for his gun, just leaned on the doorframe like they were old friends. "You always had a taste for dramatics," he said. Elsie stood slowly. "You always had a taste for stealing what wasn't yours." Clayton's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They're alive, aren't they? Federal clothed. Unhurt. You kept them in hiding. I gave them order. You would have raised them in a shack, begging for pennies. You sent me to an asylum." He nodded. "To protect them from you." Elsie's voice turned raw. "You did to silence me, because I embarrassed you by giving birth to daughters instead of sons." Clayton took a step forward. "I did it because you were weak." That was when she pulled the pistol from her coat. "I'm not weak anymore." He didn't move. "You shoot me, you lose any chance at getting out of this with your girls. I shoot you, and they finally get a life." He looked at the girls. "They'll never forget watching their mother murder someone. They'll forget what you made them believe." Grace whispered something behind her, but Elsie couldn't hear it. Her pulse was pounding. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the unbearable weight of it all. The years lost, the silence endured, the cost of survival. Clayton raised his voice. "You're not a killer." "No," she said, "but I'm a mother." The shot rang out like thunder. He staggered back, a bloom of red spreading across his chest. He collapsed, gasping, eyes wide with something between surprise and disbelief. Elsie didn't look away. The girls cried out. Elsie dropped the gun and turned to them, tears streaking down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said, holding her arms out. "I'm so sorry." It took a moment, but Grace stepped forward. Then the little one did too. She held them both as Clayton died behind her. The fallout came faster than anyone expected. Rufus arrived 20 minutes later. He'd followed the trail too, found the broken front door and the blood, then found Elsie on the floor with the girls wrapped around her. He didn't say anything, just knelt beside her, rested his forehead against hers. "Is it over?" he asked. Elsie shook her head. "It never will be." But still, they carried the girls out. By morning, word had spread. Sheriff Dole was dead. Elsie Ray was alive. And the girls, proof that everything she said was real, had come home. Some people cheered. Some called her a murderer. The judge tried to summon her. She never showed. Rufus made sure of that. Hid her in the old mill with Marin, Naomi, Grace, and the baby. The town might have been split, but the county was roaring. Newspapers demanded answers. Women from neighboring towns started telling stories of missing daughters, false hospitalizations, husbands with power who erased their wives with a signature. It all came out. Clive printed it from St. Louis. Elias mailed packets to every state house in the territory. Naomi found the ledger Clayton had kept. Every name, every date, every transaction. They nailed it to the church doors. But Elsie didn't celebrate. She didn't walk into town. She didn't take credit. She sat with her daughters in the loft, brushing their hair, sewing buttons, learning how they liked their eggs. She told them stories, told them the truth, and let them speak theirs no matter how broken it came out. She thought she'd feel peace. Instead, she felt hollow. Rufus knew better than to try to fix it. One night, after the girls were asleep, he sat with her on the roof and passed her a cup of strong tea. "You did the right thing," he said. She stared out over the valley. "Then why does it feel like I ruined everything?" "Because justice isn't clean. It's bloody. It's personal. And it always leaves someone behind." Elsie nodded. "I lost years I won't get back." Rufus looked at her. "You found them again. That's what matters." She wanted to believe him, but some things don't stitch back the way they were. Weeks passed. The girls began to laugh again. Grace started calling her mama. The baby, Sarah, clung to her like it was her birth. Marin took her first steps in a patch of wildflowers behind the mill. Elsie watched it all, heart aching with a joy that hurt more than sorrow. One afternoon, she walked to the river, stood barefoot in the cold stream, and let herself cry for the first time since she left the asylum. It wasn't relief. It wasn't even grief. It was everything. The rage, the guilt, the love. And then she let it go. When she came back to the house, The girls were waiting at the door. So was Rufus. He didn't say anything, just opened the door and let her. Later that night, when the wind howled through the hills and the fire flickered low, Elsie told them a story. It wasn't about heroes, neither villains nor perfect endings. It was about a woman who was locked away for being too loud, too brave, too inconvenient. A woman who found her daughters again, not in a dream, but in the dirt, in the blood, in the fight. A woman who'd lost everything, but never gave up. A woman who finally chose to live. And as the girls drifted off to sleep, curled beside her with their hands in her hair, Elsie whispered into the dark, "They tried to erase us, but we're still here." By the time spring painted the hills green again, Elsie's story had outgrown her. It had become legend, half-whispered truths, half-colored in fantasy passed from porch to porch, carried in letters, folded into sermons. But Elsie didn't care for the version townsfolk told. She knew what really happened, what it cost. There are no clean endings, nor perfect justice. The territory issued a statement clearing her name. Too little, too late. They labeled Clayton a man of complicated record, said his decisions would be reviewed. No mention of the girls he'd taken. He'd never apologized. Just bureaucracy trying to whitewash shame. But some things couldn't be buried. The asylum, where Elsie had been locked away, quietly closed within months. A visiting doctor, horrified by what he saw, published a damning report. Naomi sent him names, women whose families had never came for them. The press came. Donors fled. The building was shuttered. The records were burned. Still, Elsie remembered every face. Clive stopped printing train schedules. He turned his press towards stories that had been ignored. Wives who'd gone missing after childbirth, mothers who'd adopted without consent. For the first time, people read those stories and didn't look away. He gave Elsie a copy of the first edition with her name in bold across the top. She never opened it. Elias left town, headed north into colder country, where law meant something else and his conscience could start over. He didn't ask Elsie to stay. Some people didn't build to live alongside what they'd helped destroy. He left her his Bible with a note. "I believe you now. That's all I've got." Naomi stayed. She rebuilt the mill with her own hands, turned it into a refuge. Women came with nothing but bruises and babies. Women mothers who'd lost everything. Naomi gave them space, gave them work, gave them back their names. She kept a record of every story. Said it was for the next girl who came through to know so she'd know she wasn't alone. Rufus stayed on too. He didn't leave either. He fixed a fence, taught Grace how to ride, built Sarah into a cradle that creaked when the wind blew. He'd never once asked Elsie for anything more than what she could give. When she hushed, he stayed close. When she wept, he held her up like it wasn't shameful. When she laughed, he listened like it was church. But even with all that, Elsie never quite healed. Some wounds don't heal. They just stop bleeding. She kept her daughters close. Watched them for signs of the lies they'd been taught. Listened to how Grace sometimes whispered to herself when she thought no one heard. The way Sarah flinched at slammed doors. The way Marin wouldn't sleep alone. She taught them how to name things. Fear, shame, hope. She told them the truth, even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. One evening, years later, she sat on the porch as the girls ran wild through the meadow. Grace was nearly 12, almost taller than her now. Marin had her head full of knots and hers fists full of daisies. Sarah had grown that same solemn stare as Clayton's, something Elsie both hated and hated loved. Rufus brought her a mug of tea and sat beside her. "They're happy," he said. "Sometimes," Elsie answered. "That's more than most." She nodded. "They deserve more." He looked at her. "So do you." She didn't reply. Just watched the sky turn pink. Watch her daughters chase each other through the grass. Watch the world keep spinning like it hadn't almost broke her in half. "I used to wonder," she said softly, "what kind of woman I was." "You weren't the one who deserved it," he said. "No," she said, "but I was the one who survived." He nodded. Sometimes I think we're just what we're willing to carry. Elsie smiled. And sometimes we carry too much. They sat like that until the stars came out, until the girls collapsed in a heap of laughter and dirt. The wind grew colder, and the night hummed like it remembered everything. And still, Elsie didn't go inside. She looked at her daughters, thought of the asylum, the cold meals, the screaming, the silence. Thought of Clayton lying in a pool of blood with his secrets finally cracked open. Thought of herself, what she'd become. Not a wife, not a victim, not a ghost. Just a woman who'd lived through the worst of men and walked out with her children in her arms. As she stood to call them in, she paused. A rustle in the trees caught her attention. Just wind, maybe, or maybe something else. Sometimes Elsie imagined the ghosts of those who hadn't made it, walking the edges of her land, watching her daughters grow, smiling through the leaves. She liked to think they saw her now, alive, unbroken, not erased, just rewritten,